I have looked forward to giving this sermon for a matter of months. It's taken me a long time to get it together, and I'm not sure I've got it all together by any stretch of the imagination, but I would like for us to take a journey today in faith. And so I've entitled this sermon today, Face, Affect, and Effect. Now, can you tell me the difference between affect and effect? Most people cannot, and they do not use the words properly. To affect something, EFF, is a verb, and to affect something is a noun. However, they get interchanged quite often. And so I want to talk about the affect, EFF, the verb of faith, and the effect of a verb, the noun and what it means. And I want to talk about faith and what Jesus has to say about it. Now, this is obviously a huge subject, but I'm going to talk about a small part of it, and I have to smile when Karen unknowingly plays the song Small Dreams, because I'm going to talk about the faith of a grain of mustard seed. And for all of us who are familiar with mustard seeds and what the Bible tells us about mustard seeds, it basically is the smallest of seeds. Very, very small. And it is used in the Bible several times, talking about how things grow, how it expands, how something small becomes something rather big. And I want to talk about how something small becomes rather big today. But so I want to start with this example out of the book of Matthew. And it involves faith, it involves the disciples, it involves the society in which they live, it involves the impact that the culture, the society has. It involves our humanity, it involves God, it involves the Son of God, and people's problems. So we begin here in verse 4. I'm going to read the whole thing, and the focus is going to be on verse 20, where we're talking about faith and what Jesus did here. But this is the healing of a boy with a demon. And when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Now, again, we hopefully we can see the respect in kneeling before Jesus. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire and into the water. And I have brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. And here is, notice, this then speaks to the society and the difficulty. And this is what Jesus said, "O unbelieving and perverse generation." Jesus replied, "How long shall I stay with you, and how long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus. They saw this, and so they came to Jesus, questioning him, how was this done, and why couldn't we do this? They came to Jesus in private. Now, again, that's one of the beautiful things oftentimes, and we find ourselves, we don't want to question ourselves sometimes in public because we don't want to be embarrassed by the situation. So they come to him in private and ask, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he replied, "Because you have so little faith." Now, I wouldn't want to hear that in and of myself. I tell you the truth. If you had the faith as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will be moved. And it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Now, Jesus had, earlier we recognized Jesus had been transfigured. He'd gone up to a high mountain. So let's make some suppositions around this. what Jesus is saying. Let's suppose that high mountain is Mount Hermon, because he was in the area of Caesarea Philippi. And Mount Hermon, my understanding, is about 9,200 feet up, elevation. It is the only mountain in Israel, Lebanon, that border there, that you can ski. It's a snow-capped mountain. So if you're thinking about the things that are happening here with this, that's a pretty big mountain to move. And when you think about moving the mountain, you're not thinking just moving the snow cap or whatever with Jesus, but you could move a mountain. So we ask ourselves, how could a little mustard seed of faith move a mountain? How could that small of something move a mountain? The point we need to understand, the amount of faith is not what is important. Rather, what is important is, who do we have faith in? Because Jesus is going to tell us that these things are not, you can do all kinds of things that are not impossible with God. So what matters is God in whom that faith is placed. Now let's take a look at some other things in this regard. What might have impressed the disciples' faith more? And with that, we were going to ask ourselves the same question. What would have been more impressive to us? To heal the boy of a demon, or to move a mountain? Now, there's some things that go here that's important for us, and I want to touch on this very briefly, the affect and the effect of this man's faith who came to Jesus. He saw the effect, the work of Jesus. He saw what Jesus did, Jesus, having the demon come out. They also saw the effect, the EFFCT of this, in that from that moment on, this boy was not throwing himself into a fire. He was not throwing himself into the water. Therefore, there was, to this faith, there was also an effect. If I'm the dad, and I have this son, and I see this happen, and all of a sudden, in a moment, my son is healed, I'm going to be affected by it. My mind is going to be impressed. And when my mind is impressed, my mood is going to change. I am going to feel really, really good. And this is part of why I want to give this sermon, because I want us to realize how paramount faith is in all of our lives. We are people of faith, of a grain of mustard seed, or less. And we try to have that faith, and we try to focus that faith in God, because we know with God all things are possible. But in our humanity, it isn't always easy for us to do that. And we see Jesus working with his disciples and trying to help them to understand that. So the disciples only saw the result. Here's a little bit of an issue that we might not think about, but in terms of being impressive. When we think about faith, faith is evidence of things that we haven't seen. We read there, and I had my wife read from the book of Romans what the Apostle Paul talks about, from faith to faith, that the things that God has done, and that the righteous live by faith, and that we live in a world where people are without excuse. There are so many things out there. And Paul is talking about the creation of the world and the faith that we have as a result of what God has done. And we see that. And it's a very important part. But my point here is, I'm going to suggest to us all that a demon leaving the body of this boy is invisible. You don't see it. What you do see is the effect. You also are able to see and feel the effect of this man's faith. But you see the effect. So there's an effect that has taken place. So we see the effect of Jesus rebuking the demon. Now, let's take the other part of what Jesus is saying about, and we're going to assume, this is an assumption, but it doesn't have to be Mount Hermon. It could be Mount Diablo. So we're all familiar in our area about Mount Diablo. It's the highest point around the Bay Area and the like. But if Mount Diablo were moved, as Jesus said, if we had the faith of a grain of mustard seed, we could move mountain. And that's only, I think Diablo is about 3,400 feet high elevation, 34, 36, whatever. So you got to imagine Mount Hermon is 3 times that. But just say, we ask ourselves this question. Mount Hermon being picked up and moved, as Jesus says, over yonder. So yonder is a bit of a distance, so we're doing that. Now, this would involve, these are things that help our human faith, it would involve sight. Because the mountain was here, and now it's here. It would involve sound. You know, you pick up a mountain, it's going to make a little noise. It's going to be a little groaning going on and the like. And it would involve physical proof. You would have physical proof. This mountain was located, our GPS, Google would have to change the GPS location of Mount Diablo. And so there would be physical proof, and there would be a multitude of witnesses that would verify this happened. Now, there would be those that would probably question it, how that could have happened. There was a geological shift, and it just moved, but they didn't have cameras back there and videos and people's, hey, what just happened? They would not see that. But it would be clear before and after the event. It would be perfectly clear because of those things. It would be, and this is part of science now, it would be measurable, because in science you must measure stuff. It would be validated, because there would be all kinds of validation to this, but not replicated. Because you'd have to move the mountain here and then back and then do it again. That's the other thing about science. If you're going to prove something scientifically, it must be replicated. You must be able to reproduce that over and over again. Now with Jesus, we see replication in healing. He healed a lot of individuals and in groups, and people brought groups and they were all healed. We see replication of that, but we don't see how it was done, other than the example of the man who was blind, where he took clay and spit on it and put it on his eyes. But remember this, that individual said when he was questioned and really put to the test by the scribes and Pharisees, he's saying, I don't know how it happened. All I can say is I was blind, but now I see. You see, the scribes and Pharisees didn't believe that. And so we find that difficulty. So moving a mountain would affect the landscape. There would be a work done. There would be movement, and it would affect the landscape. Where you couldn't see through that area now, you could see through that area because it's flat, and then it's going to block the other area. So there's an effect that would take place. It would also affect those who saw it. So if you and I saw that, this incredible movement, we would be affected by it emotionally. We would be impressed by that. And so, again, that's why I bring up that affect is to impress the mind or to move feelings. In the world of psychology, we talk about the affect of a person. It shows the temperament, the mood, what's happening there. So now my question to us is this: which of these events would we feel most comfortable trying? Which one? Now, if by a grain of mustard seed, faith of grain of mustard seed, you could do these things, which one would we, if we were called upon to try one of these, which one would we try? Well, I can say, as far as the disciples are concerned, they tried to cast out the demon. They didn't even move to try to move a mountain. I would say that I would have to try that which was invisible. I would have more faith that possibly I could do that than move a mountain, because I haven't tried to move a mountain. I haven't even thought about possibly moving a mountain. It doesn't occur to me, other than by Komatsu, Caterpillar, or whatever, dynamite, like. I haven't thought about that. And which event would bolster our faith more? I believe, as a human being, my faith, if Jesus said, I'm going to move this mountain from here to here, I would probably have more, because I can see it, I can hear it, I can validate it, I can do all of these things. That would produce more faith in me than a demon being cast out, which I didn't see. Can't figure out how it's done, but I can see this, quote, small effect. But it does have a powerful effect on me as well. So this then brings up the challenge of faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, now we're familiar with this, and this is what it tells us, and this, of course, we can refer back to Romans that we read earlier. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for, and certain of what we do not see. So the way the King James puts it, it's evidence of things not seen. And in this particular example, the Greek word for evidence means proof, conviction, or evidence. Faith is an event, is a evidence of a God event. You think now, how many God events do we have in life? It is also a belief and trust in what we could not see. So when you're explaining to someone, and I'll use this example because it came up a week ago, and I mentioned it even here in services when Jeanette was talking about books on prayer. And she was thinking about, I want to find a book on prayer, and then she went to the store, and here's this book on prayer, and then she went here, and here were these other things. It was an event, but the way Jeanette reported it, it was a faith event. That is, God did something and provided for her something that she had prayed about, and it happened. But was it a big event? Well, it wasn't Jeanette's life. It was a God event that happened. And what I heard from Jeanette was giving credit to God for taking care of her needs, and she saw these things that happened. So I see it as a belief and trust in what we have not seen, as well as a belief that God is doing things in our life. So faith has both an affect and effect upon us. Now, let's go, as we go through here in the book of Hebrews, let's read a couple of things here in Hebrews chapter 11 that speak to this. First of all, when we look at this, let's understand what God has to say about faith as it's reported here in Hebrews 11. It says here in verse 6, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists." Now, anybody here seen God? I have not. Anybody here seen Jesus? I have not. Has anybody here seen an angel? I have not. And I'm not asking to see either, Now, have there been people who have seen Jesus? Yes. Have there been people recorded who have seen angels? Yes. And they reported to us, and we believe that they saw what they saw. We also believe there were people who saw Jesus in life, who handled him and touched him, who saw him in his life, saw him in his death, and saw him in his resurrection, and saw him after the fact, and in this particular case had just seen him transfigured on high, and they believed that what they heard was a voice from heaven telling, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased, listen to him." So it tells us here that without this, that he exists, and that he rewards those that earnestly seek him. So in this, there is an effect of pleasing God. Faith has an effect upon us. And I'll put it from Jesus' own word. When Jesus said, "I always do the things that please God," he felt good about doing God's will. In God's will, we don't always... Do you know what God's will is for you the rest of the day? No. Do you know what it is for tomorrow? The day after? Did you read this morning? You get up and check on your iPad or get on the computer and type in Google, "God, what is your will for me today?" We haven't done that. But we believe, and it is our hope, and we live by faith, that we will walk in God's will today. So let's take then a look at the effect that it had on some individuals' lives. Verse 7 and 8. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. He didn't see a thing. But by faith, he was moved to do what? Build an incredible ark. That's the effect of faith. There's a work that went with this faith. And he believed that that's what God wanted him to do. And as a result of that, he and his family were saved by faith. And it was a long period of time before that effect. Well, the effect, but then the affect of that, when the rain starts pouring down and the boat starts lifting off, it's like, thank you, Lord. Thank you. And there is an appreciation. Verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, any of us have any idea? Have we suffered through these things where we don't know where we're going? You've sat through a lot of sermons where you think, well, the pastor has no idea where he's going and the like. But anyway, this is a lot bigger deal. He did not know where he's going, but by faith he was moved, and it affected what he did. And he got up, he obeyed, he did those things. So faith in belief of God can be seen so far off in that regard. And so we're moved by that. But there is a tendency in the world in which we live, and is a tendency for us to believe as people of faith, sometimes that this is ridiculous, and people may ridicule you. So I want to use an example and to hopefully help us to understand. Back in 2015, there was a gravitational wave that passed through the earth. It was predicted by Albert Einstein 100 years ago. That as he looked at the universe and the like, and the way in which time and space, he thought that there were strong gravitational waves, and there would actually be the movement of the fabric of the universe. It would move if his theory was correct. E equals mc squared. So he believed that. He wrote about it, but he also, in all of this, believed that there was no way to prove it. Now, what does this have to do with faith? Because oftentimes what we encounter in faith is there no way to prove it. Like, how do we prove that Jesus cast out that demon? I mean, our argument could be, but the demon just got up and left of his own accord. That was just a psychotic episode that he has. It's just a mental health issue and the like. In this particular case, Jesus is talking about something that is spiritual, something that is unseen, and Jesus rebukes the demon. That the gravitational, though speaking of Einstein, that the gravitational wave would be so strong. Einstein thought, as I mentioned here, that the waves would be too weak to detect, and Einstein did not believe in black holes. He just believed that there was gravitation. Now, what is interesting about, and I want to use this comparison, gravity, as it were, kind of holds our whole universe together. We all agree that we're held onto this earth by gravity, and I want to use the kind of example, the metaphor of faith is what holds us together. It is faith that gives to us, brethren, hope. Now, hope is an affect. It is a feeling that we have. It changes life incredibly. All we have to do is somebody give us hope about something, and our lives are elevated. They're encouraged. You know, Carol was talking about hope for Rachel and a new medication. If there's a bit of hope, we feel better. Faith is the fabric that holds us together, that brings us to hope, and then helps us also to love one another, to love God, to trust in God. Because in trust, in faith, is this simplicity, is this peace, is this tranquility, is this incredible power to live life. So again, he didn't believe in that. Einstein believed that the distance between mirrors would change. So here was his theory. If we could measure these gravitational waves, what we do is we set up mirrors. And if there is a slight movement in the mirrors, then we could prove that there was a gravitational wave that came through. And Einstein said it would be an infinitesimal amount. It would be very, very small. So they built. Now they built. Let's stop and think about this. There were people who believed that Einstein might be correct. They, on a theory. What is a theory? It's an assumption of things that you don't see, you cannot prove, all these things, but they believed on this theory of Einstein enough to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to build receiving stations. Now, these receiving stations are about 2.5 miles big. And way out here on the end, they have a mirror. And they have a mirror over here. And it's a mirror that's like a vacuum tube, and it believes that if that wave passed through, it will make this tiny measurement to prove his theory. Well, on September 14th, 2005, at 5:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Times, waves were detected. And they were detected from two black holes that collided with one another 1.3 billion years ago. So, how much movement took place in these little indicators? Well, as I understand it, does anybody know how big a proton is? Does anybody know how? Yeah. Well, hold on. It moved those needles 1/10,000th of the diameter of a proton. 1/10,000th of the diameter of a proton. In fact, the way they put it in this particular article, I believe, if I can find this real quickly in terms of that, it moved it 1/10,000th of the diameter of a proton, or 10 to the 19th power of a meter. So there's a huge figure out there. That's how much. And what did people think? We have proved it. His theory correct. What did they do? They were excited. They celebrated. It's like, yes, this has been proved. There is movement, there is a gravitational wave, and we can build upon this. And they're building more sensitive detectors. Sensitive detectors to detect a gravitational wave that Albert Einstein predicted. And so the science world was both affected and affected by it. That is, the effect was their little needle moved so much that you and I could not even begin to see it. But because they were so sensitive to it and built these things, they were able to detect it and believe in it, and their scientific life was changed. I use this, brethren, to remind us sometimes things which we don't see. We look for big events. And we're only moved by big events. And we're moved by a mountain being moved. And say, well, I might believe in that. Well, 1.3 billion years ago, these stars collided. And they sent this wave out, which I think they say is 50 times the energy of the entire universe in a moment. Well, I tend to believe that God created everything. And the God that we believe in can move mountains. It's not impossible. And I tend to believe that we can learn from this example that the faith that we don't see, and sometimes we don't feel, and we don't know all the effect, that we're talking about something that God has done. So when we read here in the book of Hebrews, one of the things that we also understand here in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 3, it tells us, by faith we understand that the universe was formed by God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. How do we see these things? By faith. We are receivers of the faith in God. It's invisible. The spiritual, this is what Jesus talked about. The spiritual, we don't see it. We don't fully understand it. But an event of universe proportions happened, and it barely moved the needle of faith. And it, mostly gone unobserved and uncelebrated in both affect and effect on humankind. But I'm reminding us that what Job said in this example, when the universe, as God said, where were you when I created the foundation of the world? And when the angels of heaven sang and celebrated this incredible event, could have been billions of years ago. You and I are moved by that. The needle moves because there's a great God. The Apostle Paul writes as well, the life I now live, I live by the faith in Christ Jesus. Jesus' faith in Paul affected his life. It moved him to do things that he would not have done otherwise. And this is what James talks about. Faith without works is dead. We are people who believe that faith is a God event. That we have faith in God and what he is doing. And there is a peace that comes from faith. We trust in God. We trust God with our lives. We trust God with our past, our present, and our future. We have faith that God will do what he has said. And like Albert Einstein, it's different than a theory. And we're willing to wait. As one of the scientists put it, if Albert Einstein were alive today, he would be thrilled, and he would have no problem with knowing that he was wrong about black holes. He would say, I cannot believe this. And a smile would be on his face because what he proposed in theory was proven. So the same thing is true of us, brethren. By faith, from the creation of the world and moving forward, we find a joy and a peace that affects our life. By faith, we live a life. By faith, we have an incredible joy and a peace that we would not have otherwise. And therefore, I want to read from what the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans. Romans chapter 5, this is always so encouraging. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, Albert Einstein was justified in his theory by somebody proving it by these big receivers that made a little itty bitty move. So small, okay. We're justified as a result. As a result, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand, and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Faith has an effect and an effect upon all of us to God's glory. Let us, the righteous, live by faith. Let us live that way and enjoy our incredible God, and may he move the needle in our life of faith, and we know that and celebrate it. Let's conclude in prayer. Father, we thank you so very much for your loving kindness and for your, Father, your proof. We believe that you are God. You sent your Son. We believe that we have hope, a resurrection, eternal life. We have a spiritual life, immortality. We believe incredible things. Move our lives, Father, by having faith, the Christ's faith, to your glory and praise and honor. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
The world today is a challenging environment for Christian believers and followers of Jesus Christ. Looking for answers? Grace Communion International local churches in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto offers a comforting environment for Christians in search of spiritual growth and development. Contact our local ministry. Attend our local GCI churches at the times listed on your screen.